Caleb Morgan tipped his hat low, stepped through the saloon doors, and dropped $20 in silver on a table where a woman was being sold like a horse. He didn't shout. He didn't draw. He just looked at every man in that room until they looked away. But when the woman lifted her head and whispered what she truly wanted, the hardest man in the mountains felt his chest crack wide open. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay with me till the very end, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. $20. That was the number a man named Jeb Turner shouted across the smoke and sweat of the Oak Haven saloon, and the crowd answered him with laughter like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all summer. $20, gentlemen, and she comes with her own contract signed, sealed, and legal as Sunday. Jeb slapped the folded paper against his palm. Now who's going to do the Christian thing and take this woman off my hands? The woman he was talking about stood on a chair beside him. Her wrists were tied loose in front of her, more for show than for holding, because everyone in that room knew she had nowhere on God's earth to run. Her name was Evelyn Harper, though not one man there had bothered to ask it. To them, she was just the goods, just the price. She don't look like much, a miner called out. She looks like plenty to me. Another laughed, and the men around him howled. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't lift her eyes off a knot in the floorboards she'd picked out an hour ago and stared at ever since. Somewhere in the last year, she had learned a hard trick, how to leave her own body while it stood in front of a crowd. Her face was gone somewhere far away, up a mountain, maybe in a place these men couldn't reach. 15, a heavy man in a stained vest offered. 15. Jeb clutched his chest like he'd been shot. Boy's my heart. She's young, she's strong. She'll work a field, keep a house warm, a bed. 16 then. Now you're insulting me, Dale. The negotiating went on. That was the part that would have turned a decent person's stomach if there'd been a decent person in the room, not the cruelty of it, but how ordinary it all sounded. Men haggling over a human soul, the same easy way they'd haggle over a saddle or a mule. Nobody was ashamed. That was Oak Haven in the summer of that year. A town where the mines had swallowed every man's dignity along with his lungs, and where a woman without a husband, a father, or a dollar to her name was just one more thing to be bought. At the back of the room near the door, a tall man leaned against the wall with his hat pulled low and a cup of black coffee he hadn't touched. He'd come to town for flour, coffee powder, and salt. That was the whole of it. Caleb Morgan didn't come down off his mountain but 3 times a year, and he never came for company. He'd meant to be gone already, but he'd made the mistake of stopping for one cup before the long ride back, and now he was watching a thing he couldn't stop watching, and the coffee was going cold in his hand. 17, someone said. 17 in a jug, said another. Caleb's jaw worked slow like he was chewing on something bitter. He'd seen ugly things in his 38 years. He'd seen men freeze, seen men starve, seen the worst that cold and hunger and desperation could carve into a face. But there was a particular flavor to this ugliness. The laughter of it, the fun of it, that he hadn't tasted in a long while, and it turned his stomach in a way frostbite never had. Leave the voice in his head told him. The oldest voice he had, the one that had kept him alive up in those peaks all these years. It ain't your fight. It ain't your town. It ain't your woman. You get involved, you lose the one thing that's kept you standing your own 2 feet under you, answering to nobody. Caleb set his cup down on the little table by the door. Slow. Careful. He didn't move toward the front. Not yet. Up on her chair, Evelyn had gone somewhere else entirely. And that was when the heavy man in the vest, the one called Dale, decided he wanted a closer look at what his $17 might buy. He shouldered up through the crowd, planted himself in front of her, and reached up with 2 thick fingers to take her by the chin. He turned her face left, then right, like a man checking a horse's teeth. Yeah, Dale said, and there was a wet, pleased sound in his voice that made 3 men near the door go quiet. Yeah, I reckon she'll... Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't pull back, didn't so much as blink. She let him turn her face the way you'd let the wind turn a weather vane, and her eyes stayed fixed on that far-off place, empty as a house nobody lived in anymore. And it was the not flinching, that broke something loose in the back of the room. Because a woman who flinched was a woman who still believed she could be hurt. A woman who still believed the touch mattered, that it was worth bracing against. But a woman who didn't flinch at all, who stood there and let a stranger's hand paw at her face like it was happening to somebody else. Somebody she'd stopped being, that was a woman who'd already been broken all the way through, every last piece of her. Caleb had seen that stillness once before, a long time ago, on a face he'd spent 20 years trying to forget. His boots were moving before his head had finished deciding. He didn't hurry. That was the thing folks would tell it wrong later, when the story got passed around. They'd say the mountain man came storming through the crowd. He didn't. He walked slow and even, and it was the slowness that made men step aside. Fast is nervous. Fast is scared. Slow is a man who has already made up his mind about something and simply hasn't gotten around to telling you yet. Dale still had 2 fingers on Evelyn's chin when a shadow fell over him. "Take your hand off her." The words weren't loud. They didn't have to be. There was a flatness to them, a bottom of a Coldwell quality that carried further than any shout. Dale turned. He was a big man, bigger than Caleb by 2 stone, and he'd had enough whiskey to feel it. "The hell are you supposed to be? I'm the man asking you to take your hand off her." A pause. First time polite. The room had gone strange and quiet. Even Jeb Turner, who talked for a living, had shut his mouth. Dale looked Caleb up and down, the trail dust on him, the worn buckskin, the beard shot through with early gray, the eyes that weren't angry so much as tired in a way that was somehow worse than angry. And Dale, being the kind of man who mistook a soft voice for a weak one, made his mistake. "Or, what mountain man you gonna?" Caleb didn't let him finish the sentence. He took Dale's wrist, the one attached to the offending hand, and he simply removed it from Evelyn's face and folded it down and back, and there was a small sound, a gristle and tendon sound, and Dale went down onto one knee with a squeal that emptied every last drop of menace out of him. "There," Caleb said, mildly letting go. "Second time weren't polite, won't be a third." Dale scrambled back into the crowd, cradling his arm, his face gone red, and then white, muttering things that nobody backed up. Caleb turned to Jeb Turner. "How much?" Jeb blinked. Recovered fast the way a salesman does. "Well now, friend, we had ourselves an auction going, and the standing bids—" "How much for the paper?" Caleb nodded at the contract folded in Jeb's fist. "The whole thing. Her and that." "That depends on—" Caleb reached inside his coat. Every man in the room tensed, but what came out wasn't a gun. It was a small leather pouch, worn soft, and Caleb loosened the drawstring and turned it over onto the table. Silver coins spilled out and rolled and settled. He counted them off with one finger, sliding each one an inch to the side, unhurried, while a saloon full of men watched a summer's worth of trapping money come out of a mountain man's coat. "That's 20, Caleb said. He slid 3 more coins across. "That's for the trouble." He looked up, and his eyes went slow around the whole room, from face to face to face, and he did not raise his voice one hair. "And that's for every man in here who's going to remember what he was doing this afternoon and how it felt for the rest of his natural life." Nobody laughed now. Jeb Turner looked at the silver, then at Caleb, then at the silver again, and greed did what greed does. He picked up the coins, tucked them away, and slapped the folded contract down on the table. "She's yours, friend. All legal." A nervous grin. "No refunds." Caleb didn't touch the paper. He turned to Evelyn instead, reached up, and every man braced again, not knowing what a man like this would do, and with the same 2 fingers Dale had used, but gentle, so gentle Caleb tipped his own hat back off his brow so she could see his whole face plain. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I'd be obliged if you'd come down off that chair." For the first time in an hour, Evelyn's eyes came back from that far-off place. She looked at him. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the contract on the table with her whole life folded up inside it. And Caleb watched something work behind her face, Not gratitude, not relief. Nothing so simple as that. Something harder. Something that looked for one long moment almost like fear of a brand new kind. She stepped down off the chair. Caleb took the contract, folded it once more, and put it inside his coat. Then he pulled a knife slow, showing it flat, so no one mistook the motion, and he cut the loose rope from her wrists in one clean pull and let it drop to the floor. "You don't need that no more," he said. Evelyn rubbed her wrists, not because they hurt, because it was something to do with her hands. "Come on," Caleb said, and he turned toward the door expecting her to follow. But she didn't. She stood right where she was in the middle of that ring of men, and she spoke for the first time since Jeb Turner had put her up on the chair. Her voice was rough from not being used and quiet, but it cut through the whole room like a blade drawn across the quiet. "Why?" Caleb stopped, turned halfway back. "Ma'am, why'd you do that?" It wasn't a thank you. There was something almost angry in it, something raw. "You don't know me. You'll never see me again. Why would you spend everything you got on a woman you don't?" Her voice caught, and she made it hold. "Men don't do that. Not out here, not for nothing." The saloon waited, and Caleb, who had not said more than 50 words to another living soul in 4 months, who had come down off his mountain for flour and coffee, and nothing else in this world, stood in the doorway with the summer light behind him and tried to find an answer that was true. "I had a sister," he said finally. That was all. He didn't explain it. He didn't say what happened to her, or where, or how, or why a man of nearly 40 still went stiff and quiet when he saw a certain kind of stillness on a certain kind of face. He just said, "I had a sister," and let it sit there. And every person in that room understood that some door had opened a crack onto a room full of things that would never be talked about. Evelyn stared at him. "I'm not going to hurt you," Caleb said. "I'm not going to touch you. You want to walk out that door and go your own way this minute? That paper in my coat is yours to take, and you'll never see my face again neither." He tipped his hat. "But I'd sleep easier knowing you got somewhere to sleep tonight that ain't this town. That's the whole of it, ma'am. There's no trick in it. I know that's hard to believe. I know you got no reason on this earth to believe it." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she took one step toward the door. And another. And she followed him out into the summer street, past Jeb Turner counting his silver past, Dale nursing his wrist, past 100 men who would spend the rest of that day very quiet, and would not most of them be able to say exactly why. The street outside was loud with the ordinary business of a mining town, wagons, mules, a hammer somewhere, a preacher nobody listened to. Caleb walked toward the livery where he'd left his mule and his supplies, and Evelyn walked a careful 3 paces behind him, the way a person walks when they're not sure whether they're being rescued or just sold to a quieter buyer. Caleb slowed his pace to let her come even with him. She sped up to stay behind. He slowed again. She fell back again. After the 3rd time he gave it up and let her have her 3 paces, and he understood without a word passing between them exactly what those 3 paces meant. They meant, "I will decide how close you get to me, and no one else, not ever again." He respected it. He didn't crowd her. "There's a well up ahead," he said, not looking back at her. "Corner of the church. Water's clean. You'll want a drink before we start up. It's a long, dry way." She didn't answer. But when they reached the well, she stopped, and Caleb kept walking on to the livery to give her room, and he heard the bucket go down and come up and heard her drink long and deep, like she hadn't had clean water in a while. Which he'd learn later, she hadn't. At the livery, a bent old man named Pruitt was mucking a stall. "Morgan." Pruitt nodded. "Got your goods loaded. Flour, coffee, the powder. Salt's in the left pannier." He paused, looking past Caleb toward the well, toward the woman standing there in the sun. His eyes were old and tired, and unlike most eyes in Oak Haven, not cruel. "That the Harper woman?" Caleb went still. "You know her name. Everybody knows her name. Knows her story too, the ones that care to." Pruitt leaned on his pitchfork. "You buy that contract off Jeb Turner." "I did." The old man was quiet a moment. Then he did a thing that surprised Caleb. He took off his own battered hat, the way a man does at a graveside, and held it against his chest. "Then God bless you, Morgan," Pruitt said low. "God bless you, and God help you, 'cause you got no idea what you just walked into." Caleb frowned. "It's a woman in a contract. I'll take her to the next town, get her set up someplace decent. That's the—" "It ain't just a woman." Pruitt glanced around, made sure no one was near, and dropped his voice further still. "You listen to me now, Mountain Man, on account of you did a good thing in there, and good men are rare, and I'd hate to see you buried for it. That woman didn't come into Jeb Turner's hands on account of no husband dying, whatever he told the room. Jeb runs paper for a man in Denver, and that man runs paper for a man in Chicago. You know what I'm telling you. Caleb didn't. Not yet. No. It's a business. A whole system of it, all legal on the surface, contracts and debts and indentures dressed up nice, so no sheriff will touch it. They don't just deal in women." Pruitt's jaw tightened. "They deal in whatever a poor man's got left to sell when the mine's taken everything else off him. And sometimes what a poor man's got left to sell." He stopped himself, shook his head. "You ask her," Pruitt said. "When she trusts you, if she ever does. You ask her why she signed that paper in the first place. Ask her what Jeb Turner took from her before he ever put her up on that chair." The old man put his hat back on. "But you best be ready for the answer, 'cause once you hear it, a man like you, a decent man, you ain't gonna be able to ride back up your mountain and forget it. And that's a hard thing to lose. A man's peace. Once it's gone, it don't come back." Caleb looked back toward the well. Evelyn stood there with the dipper still in her hand, watching the two of them talk, and even from across the yard, he could see it. She knew they were talking about her. And she had gone very still again, that same terrible stillness, bracing herself for whatever the men decided her life was worth this time. Something turned over hard in Caleb's chest. "Thank you, Pruitt," he said, "for the honesty. Folks are short on it around here. Folks are short on everything around here." The old man went back to his mucking. "Get her out of this town before dark, Morgan, and watch the road north. Jeb's greedy, but he's got people, and greedy men get to thinking maybe they let go of a thing too cheap." They rode out of Oakhaven in the last of the afternoon. Caleb walked leading the mule because his one horse couldn't carry two in a season's supplies both, and he'd be damned before he made the woman walk while he rode. Evelyn sat the horse. She'd protested it, the first real thing she'd said since the well. 3 flat words, "I can walk," and Caleb had answered with 3 of his own, "I know you can." And then he'd held the stirrup for her without another word, and after a long, stubborn moment, she'd climbed up. That was how it went between them that first evening. Almost nothing said, and everything meant. He didn't try to fill the silence. That was maybe the wisest thing about him, though. He'd never have called it wisdom. He just didn't have the habit of talk, and so he didn't inflict it on her, and the not talking turned out to be the first kindness she could actually feel. Every man in her life had wanted something from her mouth, an answer, a smile, a sound. This one seemed content to let her keep it shut. An hour out where the road left the flat and started to climb, Caleb spoke without turning around. "There's jerky in the right pannier. Bread's a day old, but it's honest. Eat if you're hungry. You don't got to ask." Evelyn didn't move for a while. Then she reached into the pannier, slow watching the back of his head the whole time, like she expected the offer to be a trap. She took a piece of jerky. She ate it in small bites, still watching him, and when nothing happened, when he didn't turn around, didn't demand thanks, didn't make her pay for it some other way. Something in her shoulders came down half an inch. Half an inch. It wasn't much. But Caleb, who read the smallest signs of weather and animal and man for a living, saw it, and he understood it was the biggest thing that had happened all day. The road climbed. The heat of the day started to lift as the sun dropped, and the summer light went long and gold across the hills. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said. "You can ask me anything." Caleb kept walking. "I might not answer, but you can ask. That man at the livery, the old one." A pause. "He was warning you off me, wasn't he? Telling you what a mistake you made?" "No." Caleb shook his head. "He was telling me you're worth more trouble than I bargained for. which ain't the same thing at all. She was quiet. He also told me a name. Caleb went on, careful, feeling his way. Jeb Turner. Said Jeb runs paper for a man in Denver who runs paper for a man in Chicago. Said it's a business. He let that sit a second. I don't know what that means yet. And I ain't gonna ask you to tell me, not tonight, not till you're ready, maybe not ever. That's yours to keep or give. But I'll say this one time, and then I'll leave it be. He stopped walking and turned finally, and looked up at her on the horse, and there was nothing in his face but plain, honest weather. Whatever's chasing you, whatever that paper in my coat is really about, I ain't gonna hand you back. Not to Jeb Turner, not to Denver, not to Chicago, not to God Almighty himself. You hear me? I don't know you. But I bought that paper, and far as I'm concerned, that just means I bought the right to tear it up, which I'll do the minute you tell me you feel safe enough to be free of it. Not 1 second before, in case somebody comes asking to see it. But the second you say the word, Evelyn stared down at him, and for one moment, just one, the far-off place went out of her eyes entirely, and what was left behind was a young woman of 26, exhausted past the edge of exhaustion, who had not been spoken to like a human being in longer than she could stand to remember. Her chin trembled. She caught it. She would not cry in front of him. That much she had left, and she meant to keep it. You'll change your mind, she said. Quiet. Almost gentle, like she was doing him a kindness by telling him. They always change their mind. When they find out what I really am. What I really did. I don't reckon there's anything you did, Caleb said. That's worse than what got done to you. Evelyn looked away off into the gold light on the hills and didn't answer. But she didn't argue either, and Caleb turned back to the road and led the mule on up toward the mountains, toward the high country, where he'd built his life alone on purpose, one careful wall at a time, and he had the strange, uneasy feeling, walking through that long summer evening, that he was leading two people up his mountain, and that neither of them was going to come back down the same. They made camp that first night in a stand of pine where the road gave out and the real climb began. Caleb built the fire small and off to the side the way a man does when he doesn't want it seen from the trail below. He noticed Evelyn noticing that the small fire, the careful placement, and he saw her file it away, another piece of evidence in the case she was still building about whether he could be trusted. You're hiding the fire, she said. I am. From who? From whoever Pruitt was worried about. Caleb fed a stick into the flames. Old man said watch the road north. Said Jeb Turner's greedy men get to thinking they let a thing go too cheap. He looked at her across the little fire. That mean anything to you? Somebody coming after I'd rather know now than be surprised in the dark. Evelyn wrapped her arms around her knees. For a long time she watched the fire, and Caleb let her. He had learned patience from the mountain, and the mountain had learned it from 10,000 years, and he could outwait almost anything. There might be somebody, she said at last. Not for me. A bitter little breath that wasn't a laugh. Nobody's coming for me. I'm $20. You can get $20 anywhere. She turned her face to him, and the firelight found her eyes. But there's a paper, in your coat. It's got my name on it, and it's got a number, a debt. And that debt, it doesn't just go away because you paid Jeb his $20. Jeb doesn't own the debt. He just holds the paper. The debt belongs to a company, and the company doesn't forget. What company? I don't know its real name. Nobody says its real name. Evelyn's arms tightened around her knees. The men who work for it, they just call it the house. The house holds your note. The house expects payment. The house sent me. She swallowed. The house is in Chicago, and the house does not lose money, Mr. She stopped. I don't even know your name. Caleb, he said. Caleb Morgan. Mr. Morgan. Caleb. She didn't use it. Not yet. The house doesn't lose money, Caleb. So somewhere in a ledger in Denver or in Chicago, there is a line with my name on it and a number next to it, and that number is a lot bigger than $20. And as long as that number sits unpaid, they will send men to collect it. Not because they want me, Because a debt they let walk away is a debt that teaches every other debt it can walk away too. You understand, it was never about me, it's about the ledger, it's about the number staying honest. Her voice had gone hard and flat, reciting something she'd clearly had recited at her many times. That's what the man from Denver told me. He said, "Miss Harper, I take no pleasure in this, but if I forgive your note, I have to forgive 1,000 notes, and then there is no house, and then a great many people go hungry." He said it kind, like he was sorry. That was the worst part. He was sorry, and he did it anyway, and he'll do it to the next one and be sorry about that one too. Caleb was quiet a long moment. "How much?" he said. "The number." Evelyn told him. Caleb's face didn't change, but something behind it went cold and still and set like water hardening to ice, because the number she said was more money than he had ever held in his hands at one time in his entire life, more money than he could make in 10 years of good trapping, more money than his whole mountain was worth if you sold every tree and stone on it. "That's not a debt," he said slowly. "That's a cage. Ain't no way to ever pay that. That's a number built so it can't be paid." "Yes." Something flickered in Evelyn's eyes, surprised that he'd seen it so fast. "Yes, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it's for. If I could pay it, I'd be free, and they don't want me free. They want me owing. Forever. That's the whole—" Her voice broke just slightly, and she pressed her lips together and got it back. "That's the whole business. That's what the old man at the livery meant. It's not one bad man. It's not Jeb Turner. Jeb's nothing. Jeb's a flea. It's a machine. And it eats people like me, and it's hungry all the time. And it's legal, every bit of it's legal. There's papers and lawyers and everything signed." She looked at him with a kind of desperate clarity. "So you see, you should have left me in Oakhaven, because now the machine knows my paper walked out of that saloon in a stranger's coat, and the machine is going to come and find out why." The fire popped. An owl called somewhere up the slope, and Caleb Morgan sat there and understood finally and fully exactly what old Pruitt had been trying to tell him in the livery yard. He hadn't rescued a woman. He'd stepped in front of a machine. He should have felt fear. Any sensible man would have felt fear. Instead, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years, not since a certain day, a certain face, a certain stillness. He'd been too young and too far away to do anything about. He felt his hands go quiet and sure. He felt the tired lift off him like fog burning off a valley. He felt purpose, and it frightened him more than any machine ever could, because he knew what it cost. He knew that a man who let himself care about one single thing in this world had just handed the world away to break him. "Evelyn," he said. First time he'd used her name. She looked up. "You keep saying I should have left you." Caleb leaned forward, forearms on his knees, and looked at her across the small hidden fire with those tired, patient, terrible eyes. "So, I'm going to tell you something, and then we're both going to sleep. And in the morning, you can decide I'm a liar or a fool or worse. That's your right." He drew a slow breath. "I've spent 20 years telling myself the smartest thing a man can do is need nothing and nobody. Build his walls high. Answer to himself. I believed it. I still half believe it. Attachment's a rope around your neck. You love a thing, you've given the world a place to hurt you, and the world will find it. The world always finds it." He nodded, slow, agreeing with his own hard philosophy. "That's true. Every word of it's true. Then this afternoon, I watched a man turn your face left and right like he was checking a horse's teeth," Caleb said, "and I watched you not flinch. And I want you to know, ma'am, I want you to know it down to your bones that the not flinching is the thing I can't ride away from, because I've seen it before, on somebody I loved, and I was 200 miles away and 14 years old, and there wasn't a blessed thing I could do about it, and I have carried that for 20 years. His voice didn't rise. It got quieter, which was worse. "So no, I ain't leaving you in Oakhaven. And it ain't got a thing to do with you being worth it or not worth it, or with what you did, or with any debt or any house or any machine in Chicago. It's about a promise I made to a ghost a long time ago and never got to keep." He looked into the fire. "I couldn't save her. So I'm going to be the kind of man who doesn't ride away next time. And you're next time, Evelyn Harper. I'm sorry. I know that ain't fair to you to be somebody's second chance. But there it is. That's the whole ugly truth of it, and you got a right to know what you're traveling with." The fire crackled. Evelyn Harper looked at this strange, silent, broken man who had spent everything he owned on a stranger, and was now telling her plainly that he'd done it half for her, and half for a dead girl he still hadn't named. And for the first time in more than a year, something moved in her chest that she'd thought was dead and gone for good. It wasn't trust. It was too soon for trust. She'd been taught too well what trust cost. But it was the raw material trust was made from. It was the first small crack in a wall she'd built as high and careful as any wall Caleb Morgan had ever built around his mountain. "There's something else," she said very quietly, and Caleb heard a new kind of fear come into her voice. Not fear for herself, but a deeper, older, more desperate thing. "Something I haven't told you. Something I haven't told anybody, because the second I say it out loud to the wrong person, it's a way to control me. It's a rope around my neck, just like you said." She was shaking now, just slightly, and it wasn't from the cold. "And if I tell you and you're lying to me, if you're just another man who's going to change his mind when I stop being useful, then I've handed you the one thing that can destroy me. And I don't know if I can risk that. I don't know if I have it in me to risk that one more time." "Then don't," Caleb said gently. "Not tonight. You don't owe me a single word, Evelyn. Not one. I didn't buy your story. I just bought a piece of paper so I could tear it up. But you should know," she whispered, and her eyes were wet now, and she wasn't fighting it anymore. She was too tired to fight it. "You should know what you signed up for. Because it's not just me the machine wants back. It's not just my debt on that ledger." Her voice cracked all the way through. "When they took me when I signed that paper, I wasn't alone. There was somebody with me, somebody small. Somebody who trusted me to keep him safe, and I couldn't. I signed the paper because they told me if I did, they'd let him." She couldn't finish it. She put her face down against her knees, and her shoulders shook silent the way a person cries when they've learned that crying out loud only ever brought worse, and Caleb Morgan sat very still across the little fire, and felt the whole shape of the thing shift under him. Felt the ground he'd stepped onto in that saloon open up into a canyon he could not yet see the bottom of. He didn't reach for her. He knew better than to touch her. He just sat with her in the dark while she shook, and he kept the fire small and hidden, and he watched the black road below for men who might be coming. And somewhere up on the mountain, the owl called again and went quiet. And after a long while, when the shaking had stopped and the night had gone deep and cold around their little fire, Caleb Morgan spoke into the dark, and his voice was low and even and sure, and it did not shake at all. "Whoever he is," Caleb said, "wherever they took him, when you're ready to tell me not tonight, whenever you're ready, you tell me his name and you tell me where." Evelyn lifted her face from her knees. "And then," she whispered. Caleb fed the last stick into the fire and watched it catch. "And then," he said, "we go get him." The morning came gray and cold, and Evelyn Harper woke to find the fire already dead, and Caleb Morgan gone. For one terrible instant, the old panic seized her whole body. He left, he sold me. He thought better of it. They always think better of it. And she was on her feet before she knew she'd stood, her heart slamming, her eyes wild for the horse, for her boots, for a direction to run. Easy. She spun. Caleb stood at the tree line with an armful of deadfall, watching her the way a man watches a spooked animal, careful and still. "I wasn't going anywhere," he said. "Just gathering wood. We don't light a fire this high, but I like to have it ready in case the weather turns." He set the wood down slow. "You thought I ran off." Evelyn said nothing. Her chest was still heaving. That was answer enough. "I'm not going to leave you, Evelyn." He said it plain, no heat in it. "I know you don't believe that yet. I don't reckon you'll believe it for a good while. That's fine. I'll just keep on not leaving until the day you finally do. He crouched by the cold ashes. Now, you hungry? There's more of that bread, and I want to be climbing before the sun's full up. We got a long way today, and I don't like the smell of the sky. She looked up. The clouds were low and iron-colored, sliding fast over the peaks. Storm, she said. Storm, he agreed. Summer, storm up high. Worst kind there is. Comes on you like a fist. He handed her the last of the bread. So eat quick. We're going to try and beat it to the shelf. There's an old line cabin about 4 hours up. We reach it before the sky opens. We sleep dry. We don't. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. They climbed. Caleb led the horse now because the trail had turned to switchbacks too steep to ride, and Evelyn walked behind him on legs that had gone soft from a year of being locked in rooms. Within an hour, her lungs burned. Within 2, her feet had gone from aching to numb, to a deep, private agony she said nothing about, because saying something about pain was a habit that had never once brought her anything but more of it. Caleb noticed anyway. He noticed everything. You're limping. I'm fine. You're limping on the left. I said I'm fine. He stopped, turned, looked down at her boots. Thin, cheap town boots made for a plank sidewalk and not for a mountain, and his jaw tightened. Sit down. I don't need to, Evelyn. He said her name gentle, but it stopped her. Sit down on that rock and take that boot off, or I'm going to worry about it the whole climb, and a man who's worrying ain't watching the trail, and up here not watching the trail gets people killed. So do it for me, if you won't do it for you. She sat. She took this boot off, and she watched his face when he saw the blood soaked through her stocking, the raw meat where the heel had been rubbing her open for 2 hours, and she braced some deep-worn part of her breast for him to be angry. For him to make it her fault. Men were always angry at the cost of you. He wasn't angry. He knelt in the trail dirt in front of her, and he was gentle as a mother, easing the stocking down, hissing soft through his teeth at what he found, and he pulled a strip of clean cloth and a little tin from his pack. And he worked some salve into the raw skin with 2 careful fingers, and the whole time he didn't say one word about whose fault it was, and the not saying broke something open in her that his kindness the night before had only cracked. Why are you being like this? She said, and her voice came out ragged. Like what? Careful. She spat the word like it hurt her. Nobody's men aren't. You knelt down in the dirt. You're putting medicine on my feet. She was shaking again. Stop it. Just you're going to make me stupid. You're going to make me forget what men are. And then when you turn, and you will turn, it's going to... I ain't gonna turn. Everybody turns. It tore out of her loud, the loudest she'd been echoing off the rock, and then quieter, wretched. Everybody turns. My husband turned. He signed the paper, and he handed me across a table, and he didn't even look at me when he did it. So don't you kneel in the dirt and be kind to me, because I can't. I don't have anything left to survive you turning. I used it all up on him. Caleb went still. Your husband, he said slowly, signed the paper. Evelyn realized what she'd said. Her face closed like a slammed door. That's how it started, Caleb said, and it wasn't a question, and she couldn't take it back now. Wasn't a husband dying. Wasn't your dead at all, was it? It was his. She looked away. He gambled. Caleb was working it out loud, low, and even wrapping the clean cloth around her heel as he spoke. He gambled, and he lost more'n he had, and the men he lost it to were the house's men. And when a man owes the house and can't pay the house, don't take his hide. His hide ain't worth nothing, so they take... Stop, Evelyn whispered. They take what's worth something. Caleb tied off the cloth. They take his wife, and they take... Stop. He stopped. He sat back on his heels and looked up at her, and for a long moment there was nothing but the wind, and the two of them, and the low iron sky, and Evelyn Harper looked down at this man kneeling in the dirt with her blood on his fingers, and she made a decision she would spend the rest of her life being glad of, though she couldn't have known it then. His name is Tommy, she said. Caleb went very still. He's 5. He was 4 when they took us. He had a birthday in a place I wasn't allowed to be. Her voice had gone flat and terrible, The voice of someone reciting a thing they'd said to themselves 10,000 times in the dark. My husband owed the house $400. 400. That's what my whole family was worth. $400 and a signature. And the man from Denver. He looked at the paper, and he looked at me, and he looked at Tommy, and he said, a woman my age fetched a certain price, and a boy that young fetched a different price in a different market, and if I signed the indenture without making trouble, they'd keep us together. She was crying now, but her voice didn't break. That was the awful thing. It stayed flat and steady, while the tears ran down. So I signed. I signed it. I put my name on the paper that made me a thing you could sell because he promised. He promised they'd keep us together. They didn't keep you together, Caleb said. They kept us together for 3 weeks. Her hands had curled into fists in her lap. Long enough for me to stop fighting. Long enough for me to believe it. And then one morning a man came and he took Tommy's hand and Tommy looked back at me. He looked back at me over his shoulder and he wasn't even scared yet. He thought it was a game. He was smiling at me and they walked him out a door and the flatness finally cracked. I never saw my son again. The wind moved through the pines. Where'd they take him? Caleb said. I don't know. Evelyn, I don't know. She looked up at him desperate. That's the whole cruelty of it, don't you understand? They don't tell you. They never tell you. Because if you knew where you might go, or you might send word, or you might do something, and the house can't have that. So they keep it in the ledger, and the ledger's in Chicago. And I'm nobody. I'm $20. I couldn't get to Chicago. I couldn't read the ledger if I got there. I've spent a year knowing my baby is alive somewhere and being sold from man to man myself, and not able to do one single thing about, he'll be at a breaker. She stopped. A boy that age, Caleb said, and his voice had gone quiet and hard. The voice from the saloon, the bottom of a Coldwell voice. The house deals in what a poor man's got left to sell, Pruitt told me. Women's one market. There's another. Small hands. Small enough to reach where a grown man's can't. He looked at her steady. The mines. They use children to sort coal. Pick the slate out of the coal with their hands 12 hours a day on account of their fingers are quick and they're cheap and they don't complain. It's called a breaker. Every mining town's got one, and the house runs coal same as it runs everything else. Evelyn had gone white. How do you know that? She whispered. Because I had a sister, Caleb Morgan said. And there it was, the door that had opened a crack in the saloon opening, now the whole way. And Evelyn understood before he said another word that she was about to be given the thing he'd carried alone for 20 years. Given it as a gift, as the only thing he had to match the gift she'd just given him. My sister was Mary. She was 9 when our folks died, and I was 14, and there wasn't nobody to take the both of us. So they split us. I went to a man needed a hand for his stock. And Mary... He stopped, started again. Mary went to a factory town because a girl her age had quick fingers, and quick fingers were worth money to the men who ran the mills, and I was 200 miles away, and I couldn't read, and I couldn't write, and I had no money, and no horse, and no way, and by the time I was grown enough and free enough to go looking, his jaw worked. The lungs. Whatever it is they breathe in those places. She was 19. I got there 4 months after they'd already put her in the ground. I never even got to say a word to her. I just stood at a grave with a wrong name spelled on the marker because nobody there had even bothered to learn how she spelled it. The wind blew. Somewhere below them very far thunder rolled. So, when you tell me they took a 5-year-old boy out a door and you never saw him again, Caleb said, I don't hear a story, Evelyn. I hear my whole life. I hear the exact thing I've spent 20 years too late to fix. He got to his feet slow, and he held out his hand to help her up, and it was the first time he'd offered to touch her, and he let her decide. And I am telling you right here on this mountain before that storm gets to us, I am not going to be too late twice. Evelyn looked at his hand. And then for the first time since a man in a stained vest had turned her face left and right like a horse's. She reached out on purpose and put her own hand into another person's and let herself be helped up. Then we have to move, Caleb said. Because there's a storm coming, and there's men coming, and there's a ledger in Chicago with your boy's price on it, and all three of those things are faster than us right now. He set her boot back on her bandaged foot, gentle. Can you walk? 4, Tommy. Evelyn said, I can crawl to Chicago on my hands. Then let's climb. They climbed. The storm caught them anyway. It came the way Caleb said it would, like a fist. The iron sky splitting open all at once, so that one moment they were walking under a threat, and the next they were inside a fury, rain driving sideways, the temperature dropping so fast that Evelyn's breath went to fog and her wet clothes turned to a cold that reached into the bone. The trail turned to running mud. The horse balked and screamed. Caleb had the reins wrapped twice around his fist, and he was hauling the animal up the switchback with his whole weight shouting over the wind, and Evelyn couldn't hear the words, but she could see him gesturing up the cabins up, and she put her head down, and she climbed. Then her foot went out from under her. She didn't even cry out. There wasn't time. 1 second the ground was there, and the next it was a sheet of moving mud, and she was going over the edge of the switchback down the steep drop toward the rocks below. Her fingers clawing at nothing. A hand closed around her wrist like an iron trap. Caleb had let go of the horse. He'd let go of the horse and thrown himself flat in the mud at the trail's edge, and caught her by the wrist as she went over. And now he was holding her whole weight with one arm. His boots dug in his face. A snarl of effort, inches from the mud, and the rain hammered them both. I got you. He was hauling, dragging her up over the lip, and his voice was steady, even now, even here. I got you. I got you, don't fight me. Just look at me. Look at me, Evelyn. I have got you, and I am not letting go. She looked at him, and there it was again in his eyes. Not the effort, not the strain, but that deeper thing, that not too late. Twice thing. And she stopped clawing and let him pull, and between the two of them, they got her back onto the trail, and they lay there in the mud in the roaring rain, both of them gasping alive. The horse, she managed. Gone. Caleb was already up hauling her with him. Ran off up the trail hopefully toward the cabin. We'll find him, or we won't. Right now we walk. Right now we do not stop, because if we stop in this, we die. It's that plain. So you hold my hand, and you do not let go, and you walk. Can you do that? Yes? Say it like you mean it. Yes? Then come on. They walked into the storm hand in hand, and this time when Caleb slowed his pace, Evelyn didn't fall back to her 3 careful paces. She stayed even with him. She held on. The cabin was where he'd said it would be a low, hunched, half-rotten thing on a shelf of rock, an old trapper's line shack that hadn't seen a living soul in years, and the horse was there too, shivering and wild-eyed under the lee of it, and Caleb got the door open with his shoulder, and got them both inside, and got it shut against the wind. And for a moment, the two of them just stood in the sudden dark and the sudden quiet dripping, shaking, listening to the storm rage against the walls. It could no longer reach them through. Fire, Caleb said. There's a stove, old but it'll draw. Get out of those wet things. There's a blanket in my pack wrap in it. I won't look. I'll be busy with the fire, and I mean that. He was already moving his hands, sure in the dark. We don't get you warm and dry in the next few minutes. That falls the least of your worries. Cold like this kills quiet. You just get sleepy and you don't wake up. So move. She moved. He built the fire without once looking her way, true to his word. And by the time the little stove was throwing heat, she was wrapped in his blanket, with her wet clothes hung on a line he'd strung, and he'd stripped to his undershirt and hung his own coat to dry, and the two of them sat close to the stove in the flickering orange light, with the storm screaming outside, and could not for a while do anything but shake and be grateful to be alive. You let go of the horse, Evelyn said at last. I did. To catch me. I did. That horse is worth more than $20. Her voice was strange. That horse is worth more than me. By the arithmetic. By the ledger. You let go of the more valuable thing to catch the less valuable thing. That doesn't happen. Nobody does that. Caleb fed a stick into the stove. Ledger's wrong, he said simply. It's just wrong, Evelyn. That's the whole thing I've been trying to say to you since Oak Haven. That paper in my coat, that number in Chicago, that price on your head and your boys, it's all just arithmetic somebody made up so they could tell themselves a lie about what a person's worth. And the lie is worth exactly nothing. He looked at her across the fire. You want to know what you're worth? You're worth a horse. You're worth every horse I got, and every horse I'll ever have. And your boy's worth Chicago burning to the ground if that's what it takes to get him out of it. That's the true arithmetic. The other kind's just what evil men use so they can sleep at night. Evelyn stared at him. And something happened in her face then that hadn't happened in over a year. The corner of her mouth moved. It wasn't a smile she'd forgotten how nearly, but it was the ghost of where a smile used to live, the first stirring of the woman she'd been before the house got its ledger around her throat. You talk more than you look like you would, she said. Caleb huffed something that was almost a laugh. First time in 4 months I got somebody worth talking to. The storm raged on. And in the little cabin in the orange light, something began to thaw between them that had nothing to do with the stove. But out in the storm, 4 hours down the mountain, and climbing, 3 men were following a trail of mud and hoof prints that the rain hadn't quite managed to wash away. Their leader was a lean, patient man named Silas Vane, and he did not work for Jeb Turner. Jeb Turner had sent word that was true. Greedy Jeb, sitting in his saloon counting Caleb's silver, had gotten to thinking maybe he'd let a valuable piece of paper walk out his door too cheap, and had sent a rider down to Denver to say so. But the rider hadn't found Jeb's usual buyers. The rider had found the house's own man passing through, and the house's own man had listened to the story of a mountain trapper who'd bought the Harper woman's note and cut her ropes, and walked out into the summer street, bold as brass. And Silas Vane had gone very still and very interested, the way he always did when a note tried to walk away on its own. The Harper woman, he'd said. Evelyn Harper. That's the one. The house has been looking for a reason to make an example. Silas had checked the load in his pistol unhurried. A note that walks away teaches every other note it can walk too. Can't have that. Bad for business. He'd holstered the gun. Where's the trapper headed? Up, into the high country. Nobody rightly knows where his place is. Then we'll follow him to it, Silas had said. And we'll settle the ledger, and we'll do it in a way the next trapper who gets a bright idea hears about. He'd smiled thin and cold. Get the men, and send word ahead to the breaker. The breaker what for? Because, Silas Vane had said, if the woman's note is walking, somebody might get the notion to go looking for the other note attached to it. The little one, and I'd hate for the boy to be there if company comes calling. His smile had widened by a fraction. Move the merchandise, tonight. That was the thing Caleb and Evelyn couldn't know, warm and safe in their little cabin while the storm blew itself out. That the moment Evelyn's paper walked out of Oakhaven, the machine had not just started coming for her. It had started moving Tommy. The storm broke near dawn. Caleb woke first, the way he always did, and lay still for a moment, listening to the mountain go quiet. The wind died, the rain gone to a drip, the whole world washed and dripping and silent. Evelyn was asleep across the stove from him, wrapped in his blanket, and for the first time since he'd laid eyes on her, her face was easy. The far-off place was gone. She just looked like a tired young woman sleeping safe. He didn't wake her. He let her have it. God knew how long it had been. He was outside checking the horse when he saw the smoke. Far below, down the mountain back the way they'd come, a thin thread of gray rising through the wet trees. A campfire. Not a wildfire too small and too neat. A campfire 4, maybe 5 hours down, right about where the trail left the flat and started to climb. Right about where a man would camp if he was following somebody up. Caleb stood very still and watched that smoke for a long time. Then he went inside and knelt by Evelyn and touched her shoulder gentle. And when her eyes flew open with that first instant of panic, he said low and steady, "It's Caleb. You're safe. But I need you to wake up now, and I need you to be brave, because I got something to tell you, and I ain't gonna lie to you about it." She sat up. She read his face. Her own went pale. "They're here," she said. "There's a fire down the mountain. Somebody camped on the trail last night right where we started climbing. Could be nothing. Could be a hunter. Caleb didn't believe it and didn't pretend to. But I don't think it's nothing. I think Pruitt was right. I think somebody decided they let your paper walk too cheap, and I think they came after it, and I think they're about 4 hours below us in climbing. He took her hands. So here's what's true. We can't outrun 'em, not on one horse, not with your feet the way they are. And we can't hide forever. This cabin's a dead end. The trail past here peters out to nothing. So we got two choices, and neither of 'em's good, and I'm gonna lay 'em both out and let you choose, because it's your life and your boy, and you get the say. Tell me. 1. We run for my place. It's another half day up and over the ridge. It's defensible. I built it that way on purpose, one way in, and I know every rock of the ground. We get there ahead of them. I can hold it. Maybe. But it means a hard climb on bad feet with men behind us the whole way, and if they catch us in the open out here, we got no cover and they got guns. And 2, Caleb was quiet a moment. 2, he said. We don't run at all. We let them come. We pick the ground right here, right now, while we know where they are and they don't know we've seen them. And we settle it. His eyes were flat and cold. But I'll tell you plain what that means, Evelyn, because you deserve to know before you choose it. It means men are going to get hurt. Maybe killed. Maybe me. And if it's me that gets killed, then you're up here alone with men who work for the house, and that's a worse place than the one I found you in. So it's a gamble. It's all a gamble. There's no safe road off this mountain no more. There's only which dangerous one, and I won't choose it for you. Evelyn was silent. She looked at the little stove. She looked at the wet gray light in the one dirty window. She looked at this man who'd let go of a horse to catch her, who'd knelt in the dirt over her bleeding feet, who'd carried a dead sister for 20 years, and told her not too late twice. If we run to your place, she said slowly, and you hold it, that just means they're outside your door instead of down the mountain. That doesn't get me to Tommy. That's just a different cabin to be trapped in. That's true. And if we settle it here, her voice caught. If we settle it here and you win, then one of them might know. Where they took him, where the house keeps its ledger. One of them might be able to tell us. Caleb went still, because he hadn't thought of that. He'd been thinking like a man defending a woman. She was thinking like a mother hunting her son, and her way was harder and colder and better. You want to take one alive, he said slowly. I want to take one alive, Evelyn said, and I want to make him tell me where my son is. Her voice had gone somewhere he hadn't heard it go before, down past the flatness, past the fear, to a bedrock of pure iron that had been under her the whole time, and he was only now seeing it. I've spent a year being the thing men did things to. I'm done. If those men are climbing this mountain to drag me back to the house, then they are climbing straight to the one person in the world who wants to reach the house more than they want to keep me from it. Let them come. Let them come, Caleb. And when they get here, we don't just survive them. Her hands were steady now. We use them. Caleb Morgan looked at Evelyn Harper for a long moment. Pruitt said you were more trouble than I bargained for, he said quietly. Pruitt was right. Pruitt, Caleb said, and there was something almost like admiration in it, didn't know the half of it. He stood. He went to his pack and he took out his rifle and a pistol and a box of shells, and he laid them on the rough table in the gray dawn light. All right, we do it your way. We settle it here and we take one alive and we make him talk. But you're going to do exactly what I tell you when the time comes, no arguing, because I've done this before and you haven't, and out here doing it wrong gets you dead. Agreed. Agreed. Then here's the first thing. He handed her the pistol. She took it carefully, both hands the way a person holds a thing they're afraid of. You know how to use one of these? No. Then I'm gonna teach you, Caleb said, and we got about 4 hours to do it, and it ain't near enough, but it's what we got. He closed her fingers around the grip, gentle, sure. You point it like your finger. You don't jerk it, you squeeze it. And you do not point it at a single thing on this earth you ain't ready to kill. He looked at her. But if one of those men gets past me and gets his hands on you, you point it at him and you squeeze, and you don't think twice, and you don't feel bad about it, not for 1 second, not ever. Because a man who works for the house gave up his claim on your mercy the day he took a job dragging women up mountains. You hear me?" Evelyn looked down at the pistol in her hands. "I hear you," she said. "Say it back." "If he gets past you," she said, and her voice didn't shake, "I point it, and I squeeze, and I don't feel bad." "That's right." Caleb picked up the rifle. "Now finish the bread and lace those boots up tight over the bandage." And then Evelyn Harper. He looked at the one dirty window at the wet gray mountain, at the thread of smoke rising far below, where 4 men were breaking camp and starting to climb toward the 2 people who now knew exactly where they were and exactly what they were coming for. "We're gonna go teach the house a lesson it ain't ever gonna forget." She laced her boots. She loaded the pistol, the way he showed her, one shaking hand, steadying the other until it stopped shaking, and down the mountain 4 hours below and climbing. Silas Vane paused on the muddy trail and crouched and pressed 2 fingers to a boot print. The storm hadn't quite erased a small print. A woman's print pointed uphill, and he smiled his thin, cold smile and said to the men behind him, "She's close, and she's tired, and she's got nowhere left to run." He stood and wiped the mud from his fingers and drew his pistol to check the load one more time. "Let's go collect what the house is owed." But the house had made an error in its arithmetic, the same error every cruel man in that Oak Haven saloon had made, the same error Evelyn's own husband had made when he signed her name away, thinking her a thing worth $400 and nothing more. They had all counted her as prey. Not one of them had thought to count her as a mother climbing toward her stolen child with a mountain man beside her, who'd already buried one girl he came too late to save, and had sworn on that grave he would never, ever be too late again. The 2 of them stood together in the doorway of the little cabin as the last of the storm dripped from the eaves, and Caleb checked his rifle, and Evelyn checked her pistol, and neither one of them was shaking anymore. "They don't know we see them," Caleb said quietly. "No," Evelyn said. "They don't. That's the only advantage we got." "Then let's not waste it." Caleb looked at her. This broken woman, who wasn't broken at all, who had only been waiting all this time for one single person to hand her a reason and a weapon and the smallest chance. And he tipped his hat to her slow, the way a man does to someone he's decided to follow into whatever comes. "After you, ma'am," he said. And they stepped out of the cabin together into the wet gray morning and went down the mountain to meet the men the house had sent a mother and a mountain man moving quiet through the dripping pines, hunting the hunters, climbing down toward the fight that would decide whether a 5-year-old boy sorting slate in the dark of a breaker somewhere would ever again see his mother's face. They came down through the pines, slow and quiet, and Caleb put Evelyn behind a fallen log on the high side of a narrow place where the trail pinched between rock and drop, and he crouched beside her and put his mouth close to her ear. "This is the spot," he breathed. "Trail's too narrow here for 'em to spread out. They got to come through single file or 2 abreast at most. That takes their numbers away." He nodded down the slope. "They'll come up right below us. You stay flat. You stay quiet. You do not shoot unless I say, or unless one gets past me and comes for you. You understand? Yes. Say it. Flat quiet, don't shoot unless you say, or one gets past you. Good." He squeezed her shoulder once. "Now we wait. And Evelyn, waiting's the hardest part. Your heart's gonna slam. Your hands are gonna sweat. That's fine. That's just your body being smart. You breathe slow, and you let it. All right. All right?" And they waited. The mountain dripped. A crow called somewhere and went silent. And after a long time, a time that stretched thin as wire, they heard it. Boots. The wet suck of mud, the scrape of a heel on rock. Men climbing, careless, sure of themselves, talking low. Caleb's whole body changed. Evelyn saw it happen. The stillness that came over him wasn't the stillness of a frightened man. It was the stillness of the mountain itself, of the thing that had lived up here alone for 20 years and knew every rock and every shadow. And she understood, watching him, that the men climbing toward them had no idea what they were walking into. Then the first one came around the bend. He was a big man with a scattergun cradled loose in his arms, and he was looking at his feet minding the mud, and he never saw the log or the two people behind it at all. Behind him came a second man, thinner, a rifle on his shoulder. And behind that one, Evelyn's breath stopped. Behind that one came a lean man in a dark coat, and even from here, even at this distance, she knew him. She'd know him in her sleep. She'd known him in 100 nightmares. It was the man from Denver, the one who'd looked at her and looked at Tommy, and said a boy that young fetched a different price in a different market. The one who'd promised Kind as a preacher that if she signed, they'd keep her family together. Silas Vane. Her hand tightened on the pistol so hard her knuckles went white, and a sound started up in her throat, low and animal, and Caleb's hand closed over hers instantly hard, and his lips found her ear. "No." He breathed barely a sound at all. "I see him. I see him too. But not yet. You fire now, you kill one, and the other two scatter into cover, and then it's a long, ugly fight, and we might lose. You want him. You want the man who took Tommy. Then you do exactly what I say, and I will hand him to you. But not yet." Everything in her screamed to fire. Everything in her wanted to stand up and empty the pistol into the man who'd smiled while he tore her life apart. And it was the hardest thing she'd ever done, harder than the chair, harder than the ledger, harder than watching Tommy walk out that door. But she took her finger off the trigger, and she nodded one small nod against Caleb's cheek, and she let it go. Caleb rose up from behind the log. "That's far enough." The three men froze. The big one with the scattergun spun toward the voice, and Caleb's rifle was already on him, level and steady. "Hands where I can see 'em. All three. First man reaches for anything, I put him down, and I don't miss from here, so don't test it." Caleb's voice was flat, and carrying the saloon voice, the cold well voice. "You, big fella. Set that scattergun down slow and step off it. Do it now." The big man looked at Silas Vane. And that was his mistake, looking for permission instead of obeying, because in the half-second, his eyes went to his boss. The big man's hands twitched toward the trigger of his scattergun, and Caleb's rifle cracked once, and the big man went down. Grabbing his shoulder, the scattergun spinning off into the mud, and he was screaming, and the thin man was clawing for the rifle on his shoulder, and Caleb was already working the lever. "The thin one, Evelyn!" Caleb roared. "High over his head! Make him drop it!" Evelyn came up over the log and pointed the pistol like her finger, the way he'd shown her, and squeezed, and the shot went wide and high the way he'd wanted, and the thin man flinched and ducked and threw himself flat, and by the time he looked up, Caleb's rifle was on him too, and the whole fight had lasted maybe 4 seconds, and it was over. 2 men down or flat. And Silas Vane, standing in the middle of the trail, unhurried, his hands rising slow and easy from his sides, a thin, cold smile on his face, like none of this troubled him in the least. "Well," Silas said, "isn't this a surprise? Hands up, all the way." Caleb came down over the log, rifle steady, and Evelyn came with him, her pistol shaking, but pointed both hands on it. "You, on your knees, now." "I'd rather stand if it's all the—" Caleb fired into the mud an inch from Silas's boot. "Knees!" Silas Vane got down on his knees, but the smile never left him. That was the thing that put ice down Evelyn's spine. The man knelt in the mud with 2 guns on him, and his men shot and scattered, and he smiled like he was the one holding all the cards. "Miss Harper," Silas said pleasantly, looking up at her. "You're looking well. Mountain air agrees with you." His eyes moved to Caleb. "And you'd be the trapper. Morgan, isn't it, bought a note off a saloon flea in Oakhaven and thought that made it yours." He shook his head slow, almost sorrowful. "You don't buy a note off the house, Mr. Morgan. You just borrow the trouble that comes with it." "Where's my son?" Evelyn's voice cut across whatever Caleb was about to say. She stepped forward, the pistol out in front of her, and she put the barrel of it 18 inches from Silas Vane's face, and her hands had stopped shaking entirely. "You looked at me," she said. "In Denver. You looked at me, and you looked at my boy, and you promised. You said if I signed you'd keep us together. You said it kind. You held my baby's little hand, and you smiled at him, and then you sold him into the dark, and you've had a year to think about where he is, and you are going to tell me right now, this minute, or I swear before God, I will, or you'll what? Silas's smile widened by a hair. Shoot me. Then you'll never find him. I'm the only man on this mountain who knows which breaker they moved him to. You put a bullet in me, Miss Harper, and you put your boy in the dark forever. He tilted his head. So let's you and I talk about arithmetic, shall we? Because that's really all this ever is. Arithmetic. Evelyn. Caleb's voice low. Easy. He's baiting you. He wants you scared and angry and stupid. Don't give it to him. I'll give you arithmetic. Evelyn didn't lower the gun. You said it in Denver, so let me say it back to you. You told me a note the house lets walk away teaches every other note it can walk too. Bad for business. So here's my arithmetic, Mr. Vane. You are the house's man on this mountain, and you are on your knees in the mud with a gun in your face. And whatever the house pays you, whatever your life is worth on their ledger, I promise you it is not worth what you are about to lose if you don't tell me where my son is. Something flickered behind Silas Vane's eyes. Just for a second. The smile stayed, but the eyes flickered. And Caleb saw it. And Caleb understood something in that flicker, and he filed it away. Move him to the log, Caleb said. Both of 'em, the two that are alive. Tie 'em. There's rope in my pack. We're not doing this in the open, those shots carried, and I don't know if there's more of 'em coming behind. He looked down the trail, tense. And there's the third thing, Evelyn. There were tracks of 4 men down there at that camp. I count 3 here. Where's the 4th? The question hung in the wet air. And Silas Vane, kneeling in the mud, smiled his thin, cold smile a little wider. The 4th, he said softly, went on ahead, before dawn, while you two were snug and warm in your little cabin. He let it sit. He's a fast rider, that one. Faster than you. And he had a good long head start, and he knew right where he was going. The smile reached all the way to his eyes now. Because the moment your note walked out of Oak Haven, Miss Harper, I did the only sensible thing a businessman can do. I protected the asset. I sent word ahead to move the merchandise. He watched her face. The boy isn't at the breaker where he was anymore. By now he's on a wagon headed somewhere you'll never think to look. And every hour you waste up here on this mountain, tying up my men and pointing that little gun at my face, is another hour that wagon rolls farther away from you. Forever. Evelyn made a sound like she'd been struck. You're lying, she whispered. Am I? Silas shrugged easy in his ropes. Perhaps. There's only one way to know for certain, and it's kneeling right in front of you, and it's the only map to your son that exists in the world, and you've got a gun to its head. His voice dropped soft and poisonous. So, shall we talk about what you'll trade me to get it? Enough. Caleb's voice cracked like the rifle had. He stepped between Evelyn and Silas, and he took the pistol gently out of Evelyn's hands. She let him. She was shaking too hard now to hold it, and he passed it back to her behind him, and he crouched down in front of Silas Vane himself, slow until the 2 men were eye to eye. You're good, Caleb said quietly. I'll give you that. You got her spun up in about a minute flat. Fear and hope back and forth till she can't think straight. That's a real talent. I bet it works on near everybody. He tilted his head. Only trouble is, I've spent 20 years alone on a mountain, mister, and there ain't a lonelier feeling in this world than trying to spin a man who don't want a single thing you're selling. So it won't work on me, and I'm the one you got to get past now, not her. Silas studied him. Everyone wants something, Mr. Morgan. I want the boy. Caleb didn't blink. That's all. That's the whole list. And you're going to tell me where he is? Not because I threaten you. Not because I trade you anything. But because I'm going to explain to you real plain the exact situation you're in. And then you're going to do the arithmetic yourself. Because you like arithmetic. So let's do some. He held up one finger. 1. Your big man's shot through the shoulder and bleeding, and we're half a day from any doctor, and if he don't get help, he dies. 2. A second finger. Your other man's tied to that log, and he's already looking at you funny, wondering why the boss ain't talked his way out of this yet, wondering if maybe the boss is going to trade him to save himself. 3. A third finger. The fourth man, the fast rider, he's gone. He left you. Ran ahead to save his own skin and the merchandise, and left you to walk up here into this. So the house's loyal man is bleeding, doubting, and abandoned, all three, and it's barely past sunup. Silas's smile had gone thin. And 4, Caleb said, and he leaned in close. 4 is the one you keep leaving out of your sums, so let me put it in for you. You keep talking about the house this, the house that. The house don't lose money, the house don't forget the house sent me. Like the house is God Almighty and can't be crossed. He held Silas's eyes. But the house ain't up here, is it? The house is in a warm office in Chicago 1,000 miles away, and it don't know or care whether one Silas Vane lives or dies on some mountain in the territories. To the house, you're a line in the ledger, same as her, same as the boy. You spend your whole life doing the house's ugly work and telling folks the house don't forget, but the house already forgot you, mister. The second you knelt down in this mud, you stopped being the house's man and started being just a man, on his knees, in the wet, a long way from home. Caleb's voice went soft. So here's the real arithmetic, Silas. It ain't the house against us. It's you against us. Just you. And you're losing. The trail went quiet, and Evelyn, watching, saw the thing she'd been too spun up to see, saw Silas Vane's smile finally genuinely falter. Because Caleb had done to him exactly what he'd tried to do to Evelyn. He'd taken away the ground under his feet. He'd made him small. You think you understand the house, Silas said, and for the first time there was something real in his voice, something almost bitter. You think it's an office in Chicago, a man behind a desk, Mr. Corliss and his ledgers. He laughed low and joyless. It's not a man, Morgan. It's not even a company, not really. It's the whole thing. It's the mine that takes the father's lungs. It's the store that sells him flour on credit he can't pay. It's the bank that holds the note on the store. It's the railroad that owns the bank. It's a machine that turns poor people into money, and it's got 1,000 parts, and I'm one small gear in it, and so are you now, whether you like it or not. He looked up at Caleb with something that was almost a plea. You can't fight it. Don't you see, you can shoot me. You can shoot every man they send, and the machine won't even feel it. It'll just send more. It always sends more, because it's not men. It's arithmetic, and you can't shoot arithmetic. For a moment, nobody spoke. And then Evelyn Harper stepped up beside Caleb, and she looked down at Silas Vane, and something had changed in her face. The fear was gone, and the fury was gone, and what was left was that bedrock iron that had been under her all along. You're right, she said quietly. Silas blinked. You're right. You can't shoot arithmetic. Evelyn crouched down slow until she was eye to eye with him too. I spent a year believing exactly what you just said. That it's a machine, that it's too big, that nobody can fight it, and you might as well give up. That's the thing they teach you, isn't it? That's the real chain. Not the paper, not the ropes. The belief. The belief that it's too big and you're too small, and there's no point in even trying. Her voice didn't rise. It got quieter, and somehow that was more terrible. But here's what you don't understand, Mr. Vane. Because you've only ever been a gear. You've never been the thing that gets fed into the machine. You've never had them take your child. She let that sit. A machine runs on arithmetic, she said. But I'm not arithmetic anymore. I stopped being arithmetic the moment this man let go of a horse to catch me falling off a mountain. He proved the ledger's a lie. He proved a person can decide the numbers are wrong and just refuse. Refuse to add up the way they want. And a machine can't do anything with a person who refuses. It's got no gear for that. It's never had to build one because almost nobody ever does it. She leaned closer. You want to know why you can't spin me anymore? Why the fear and hope stopped working? Because I've got nothing left to be afraid of losing except my son. And you can't threaten a woman with the only thing she's already lost. You can only give it back or refuse to. And if you refuse to, her voice went to a whisper, Then you'll spend the rest of a very long life knowing you were a gear that could have chosen just once to be a man. Same as he did. Same as I'm asking you to do right now." Silas Vane stared at her, and something moved across his face that hadn't been there before. Something old and buried and painful, and for a moment, he wasn't the house's smooth, cold man at all. For a moment, he was just tired. "I had a boy," Silas said. The words came out of him like they surprised him. "Long time ago, before the house, before—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "The fever took him. Nothing I could do, no arithmetic in the world could buy him back. And I told myself that if a man's going to live in a world where that can happen, where a child can just be taken, and there's not a thing you can do, then he might as well be on the side that does the taking. At least then it doesn't happen to you. At least then you're the one holding the ledger, instead of the one being crossed off it." His voice cracked just slightly. "I've told myself that for 11 years. How's it working?" Caleb said quietly. Silas Vane looked up at him. And for a long, long moment on that narrow, muddy trail with one man bleeding and another tied to a log and a fast rider hours ahead, carrying a stolen child farther into the dark, the house's man knelt in the mud and did his arithmetic. "The Blackwater Breaker," Silas said at last, so quiet they almost didn't hear it. "That's where he was. But I told the truth about one thing. I sent word to move him. There's a company town 2 days east on the rail spur, called Hollisburg. They run the biggest breaker in the territory there, and they move the young ones through it and out on the eastbound cars to the mills. And they do it fast because a child that's been moved is a child that's hard to trace." He drew a shaking breath. "If your boy's not already at Hollisburg, he's on the road to it. And once he's on those eastbound cars, Miss Harper, once he's past Hollisburg and into the mill country back east, I'm telling you the truth now, no arithmetic, no lie, you will never, ever find him again. The mills swallow them. They come out with new names in ledgers you'll never see." Evelyn had gone white. "How long? How long do we have?" "The wagons run twice a week to Hollisburg. The eastbound cars leave Hollisburg on Sundays." Silas closed his eyes. "It's Thursday." The word landed like a stone. 3 days. 3 days to cross to a company town, 2 days east, find the biggest breaker in the territory, get one 5-year-old boy out of it, and get clear before the Sunday cars carried him east into a country of mills and ledgers and new names gone forever. "Then we don't have time to waste up here," Caleb said, and he was already moving, already thinking. He hauled Silas to his feet by the ropes. "You're coming with us. Far as Hollisburg. Because you know the town and I don't. And because I don't trust you far enough to leave you at my back on this mountain, and because—" He looked at the man hard. "Because I think there's still enough of a father left in you to want to unmake one of the things you did. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you'll try to run or turn on us the first chance you get. But I've spent 20 years reading weather off a sky, and I'm reading you right now, and I don't think you will." He tightened the ropes. "Your bleeding man stays here, Evelyn. We'll bind his shoulder proper before we go. I won't leave even him to die. That's not who we are. The other one we cut loose and send back down the mountain on foot to fetch the wounded one a doctor. And you and me and Evelyn ride east. Fast. Starting now." "You're a fool, Morgan," Silas said, but there was no venom in it anymore. "You'll never get him out of Hollisburg. The breaker's guarded. The town's owned. Every man in it works for the house." "Maybe." Caleb pulled the ropes and started him walking. "But you said it yourself. The machine's got no gear for a person who refuses." He looked back at Evelyn, and she fell in beside him. Her jaw set her son's name afire in her chest. "And we got 2 of those, headed straight for its front door." And so they came down off the mountain that Thursday morning, a mountain man who'd sworn never to be too late, twice a mother who'd stopped being arithmetic, and a broken gear of a man who'd remembered kneeling in the mud that he'd once been a father too. And they turned their horses east toward a company town called Hollisburg, toward a breaker full of children with quick small hands, toward the eastbound Sunday cars, and the 3 days that stood between Evelyn Harper and the last chance she would ever have to look upon her son's face again. They rode east through Thursday and into the night, and they didn't stop. And by the time the gray of Friday morning came up behind them, all three riders were gray themselves with exhaustion, and the horses were blown, and Hollisburg was still a day off. Silas Vane rode in the middle, his hands bound to the saddle horn, and for the first hours he said nothing at all. But somewhere in the black middle of that night, when the only sound was hooves and wind, he'd started talking low like a man who'd held something so long that once the seal broke, it all had to come out. "You want to know how it works," he said. "The breaker. So you're not walking in blind. I'll tell you because you're going to see it anyway, and I'd rather you saw it knowing." "Tell me," Evelyn said. "They start them at first light. The young ones, the 6 and unders like your boy. They don't do the picking yet. Their hands aren't strong enough to break slate. They do the sorting. They sit on benches over the chutes, and the coal comes down, and they pull the rock out of it with their bare fingers, hour after hour, and the coal cuts their hands to ribbons the first month till the scars build up thick enough." His voice was flat. "There's no talking aloud. There's a man walks the benches with a stick. They call him the breaker boss, and if a boy slows or cries or reaches for a hurt hand instead of the coal, the stick comes down. They work till dark. They sleep in a bunkhouse behind the Tipple 40 to a room. And the ones that get the cough—" He stopped. "The ones that get the cough, they don't move east to the mills. They just stop being on the ledger." Evelyn made a small sound and pressed her hand to her mouth. "You did this," she said. "You put children there. You put my child there." "Yes." "How?" Her voice shook. "How does a man who lost his own boy to a fever, how do you do that knowing what it is to lose one?" Silas was quiet a long moment. "Because I told myself they weren't mine to lose," he said finally. "That's the trick of it, Miss Harper. You never let yourself see them as children. You see them as merchandise, as entries. You count them, you don't know them. The day you learn one of their names is the day you can't do the work anymore." His jaw tightened. "And I made very sure never to learn a single one." "Tommy," Evelyn said. "Don't. His name is Tommy. He's 5. He likes to be carried on shoulders, and he's afraid of thunder, and he sucks his thumb when he's tired, even though I told him he was getting too big for it." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through it, and she leaned toward Silas in the dark. "You're going to learn his name, Mr. Vane. You're going to carry it the rest of your life. That's the price. You want to unmake what you did. You said, maybe there's still a father left in you. Then the very first thing you do is you learn his name. Tommy Harper. Say it." Silas Vane rode in silence. "Say it." "Tommy Harper." Silas said very low, and something in his voice broke on it, and he didn't try to hide it, and none of them spoke again for a long while after that. They stopped at midday to rest the horses in a dry wash, where they couldn't be seen from the road, and while the animals blew and cropped at the thin grass, Caleb drew Evelyn aside out of earshot of Silas. "I don't like it," he said quietly. "Which part?" "Any of it, but mainly him." Caleb nodded toward Silas, slumped exhausted against a rock with his bound hands in his lap. "He's turned soft on us, and maybe it's real, that business about his boy and the fever. I think it is real. I've watched his face, and I don't think a man fakes that. But real don't mean safe, Evelyn. A man can be truly sorry and still sell you out to save his own neck when the moment comes. Grief and cowardice live in the same house more often than folks like to admit." He looked at her. "And there's the thing he said about a fast rider going on ahead. If that's true, then Hollisburg already knows we're coming. They'll have had word 2 days. So we might be riding into a town that's waiting for us with the doors locked and the guns loaded, and our only guide is a man who might be leading us into exactly that." Evelyn was quiet. "You think he's leading us into a trap?" she said. "I think I don't know. And I think not knowing is a bad way to walk into a company town full of the house's men." Caleb rubbed his jaw. "So I want to test him. Before we get there, I want to know which Silas Vane is riding with us, the sorry father, or the house's gear playing sorry to stay alive till his friends can spring us." He looked at her. And I got an idea how. But you're not gonna like it. Tell me. When we get close, few miles out, I split off. Alone. I go in quiet on foot at dusk, and I scout the breaker and the town, my own self, the way I'd scout a valley I meant to trap. I find out where the boy is, where the guards are, how many, and whether they're set up waiting for us, or just going about their business. He held up a hand before she could argue. And you stay back with Vane. Which means for a couple hours, you're alone with him holding the gun, and we find out real quick whether he tries anything the second I'm out of sight. If he's true, he sits quiet and helps you. If he's playing us, that's when he'll make his move, when it's just a woman and a rope between him and running to his friends. Evelyn's stomach turned. You want to use me as bait? No. Caleb's voice was sharp. God, no. I want to not walk the both of us blind into a trap. I want eyes on that town before we bet everything we got on it. And yes, leaving you with him tests him, and I hate it. I hate every part of it. But Evelyn listened to me. He took her by the shoulders, gentle, urgent. If I scout that town, and it's waiting for us, then knowing that saves your life and Tommy's. And if I don't scout it, and it is waiting, then we ride in together, and we die together, and Tommy gets on those Sunday cars anyway. I can't protect you by staying close, if staying close just means we're both surprised at once. Sometimes the way to keep somebody safe is to leave 'em so you can see the thing coming that'd kill 'em both. She looked at him for a long moment. You'd come back, she said. It wasn't quite a question. Evelyn? He held her eyes. I let go of a horse to catch you. You think I'd let go of you? His voice went low and sure. I will scout that town, and I will come back to that dry wash where I leave you, and I will come back before full dark. You have my word, and my word's about the only thing I've kept whole and clean my entire life. I've lost near everything else, but I have never once broke it, not to a living soul. I'm not going to start with you, and that, more than the horse, more than the salve on her feet, more than any of it was the thing that finally fully broke down the last wall Evelyn Harper had built. Because she believed him. Not with hope, which is fragile, and not with fear's opposite, which is just fear in a mask. She believed him plain the way you believe the ground will hold, and she hadn't believed anything plainly in over a year. All right, she said. Go scout your town. I'll hold the gun. And Caleb, she caught his sleeve as he turned, come back before dark, because I've got a whole speech I've been saving up to say to you, and I'm not going to waste it on your grave. Something moved in his weathered face. Not quite a smile, but near it. Yes, ma'am, he said, and tipped his hat. They rode the rest of that day, and camped that night in cold silence. And Saturday morning they came within a few miles of Hollisburg, and Caleb drew them off into a dry wash thick with brush where the horses could be hidden and the two of them could wait. He checked his rifle. He checked the pistol and pressed it into Evelyn's hands and folded her fingers around it. Same as before, he said. He tries anything, you don't hesitate. Silas, bound against a rock, watched them and said nothing. Before dark, Evelyn said. Before dark. Caleb looked at her one long moment more. Then he was gone, slipping off through the brush quiet as smoke, and within 30 seconds, Evelyn couldn't see him at all, and she was alone in a dry wash with a bound man who'd stolen her son, holding a gun she'd fired exactly twice in her life. For a long time, neither of them spoke. He's a rare one, Silas said finally. Don't. I'm not working you, Miss Harper. There's nothing left to work you for. I'm just saying a true thing. Silas shifted against his rock. In 11 years with the house, I met maybe 2 men like him. Men the machine couldn't buy and couldn't scare and couldn't spin because they'd already decided the one thing they cared about and everything else fell away. He was quiet a moment. It's the only thing the machine's afraid of, you know. Not guns. Guns, it understands guns are just arithmetic. So many men and so many bullets. What it can't figure is a man who's already made his peace with dying for a thing. There's no price you can offer him. No threat that lands. He's already paid. He's just waiting to see what he bought. Silas looked at her. That's your trapper. He paid a long time ago, standing at his sister's grave with the wrong name on it. He's just been waiting 20 years to find out what he bought with all that grief. And I think... His voice went strange. I think he just found out. I think it's you, and your boy. Evelyn's throat was tight. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm going to help you, Silas said. Truly. And I want you to believe it before we get in there so you don't waste a second of it, second-guessing me at the wrong moment, because in a place like Hollisburg, a second's wasted second-guessing can get a child killed. He leaned forward against his ropes, urgent now. And because I have to tell you something, and Morgan's not here to soften it, so you're going to hear it raw. There's a thing about Hollisburg, about the breaker. Something I didn't say on the mountain, because on the mountain, I was still half the house's man, and I was holding a card back. But I'm all the way turned now, God help me, and you need every card there is. What card? Silas Vane looked at her, and his face was grim. The man who runs the Hollisburg breaker, he said. The breaker boss, the one with the stick that walks the benches. He swallowed. His name is Hiram Cole, and Hiram Cole is Corliss's son-in-law, and he is the cruelest man I have ever known, and I have known cruel men my whole life. He doesn't run that breaker for the money, Miss Harper. The money's nothing to him, he married into it. He runs it because he likes it. He likes the stick. He likes the benches. He likes small things that can't fight back. Silas's jaw was tight. And I'm telling you this so you understand what your boy has been living inside of for a year. And so you understand that when your trapper goes into that town tonight to scout it, the man he's scouting is not a businessman doing arithmetic. He's a man who enjoys hurting children. And men like that, they don't guard a thing to keep it safe. They guard it because it's theirs, and they'd sooner break it than lose it. The words sat in the dry wash like a cold stone. You're saying, Evelyn said slowly, that if Hiram Cole finds out we've come for Tommy, I'm saying he might hurt the boy just to spite you. Silas said it plainly because there was no kind way. I'm saying that's the real clock. It's not just the Sunday cars anymore. It's that the second Cole knows a mother's come clawing after her child, a man like that gets ideas about what he can take from her that she can't ever get back. So whatever you and Morgan are planning, it can't be loud, and it can't be slow, and Cole can't see it coming. Because if he sees it coming, he'll use the boy against you, and he'll enjoy it. Evelyn had gone white and still, and that was when a sound came from the brush at the edge of the wash, a boot snapping a twig, and it was too soon. Hours. Too soon. It wasn't dusk, Caleb had said before dark, and it was barely past midday, and Evelyn came up onto her knees with the pistol out in front of her. Both hands shaking, pointed at the brush, her heart slamming. It's me. Caleb's voice low and fast, and then he was there breaking through the brush at a crouch, and one look at his face turned Evelyn's blood to ice. Because Caleb Morgan did not look afraid, she'd never once seen him afraid, but he looked urgent in a way she'd never seen either, and that was worse. You said dusk, she breathed. Change of plan. Everything's changed. Caleb dropped down beside her, already talking fast. I didn't even make it to the breaker. I got maybe a mile out, and I ran into a work party on the road, men loading a wagon. And I got close enough in the brush to hear him and Evelyn. He grabbed her hand. They weren't loading coal. They were loading children. There's a wagon leaving Hollisburg today, this afternoon. Not Sunday, today. The whole world dropped out from under her. What? The Sunday car story's off. Somebody moved the schedule up. Caleb's eyes cut to Silas, hard and suspicious. Somebody warned that town we were coming just like you said might happen, and now they're clearing out the young ones early, getting them on a wagon and gone before we can get near, which means we don't have 3 days. We don't have till dark. We've got till that wagon rolls, and from what I heard it rolls this afternoon, and once it's gone, that's it. They scatter the children out in Tommy's smoke. Then we have to go now. Wait. Caleb held her down. There's more. And you're not going to want to hear it. He looked at her and his voice dropped. I got close enough to see the children get loaded. And Evelyn, I looked. I looked at every face I could see. I was hunting for a boy 5 years old, you said. And I got no picture of him, but I figured a mother's boy of 5, I'd know something in the look of him. He stopped. His jaw worked. He wasn't on that wagon. I'm near sure of it. None of those children was young enough. They were all older, 7, 8 up. Not one of them was a boy of 5. Evelyn couldn't breathe. Then where? And Silas Vane, bound against his rock, made a sound. It was a terrible sound, a low, broken sound, the sound of a man realizing something in the same instant it damned him, and both of them turned to look at him. And Silas Vane had gone gray as ash, and he was staring at nothing, and he said in a voice that didn't sound like his own, "They don't ship the little ones." What? Evelyn was on him in a heartbeat, the gun forgotten, her hands fisted in his coat. What does that mean? What do you mean they don't ship the little ones? The 6 and unders, the sorters. Silas's voice was hollow. I told you on the mountain the young ones sort, they don't break slate yet. Their hands aren't strong enough. They only get shipped east to the mills once they're old enough to be worth a mill's wage. The little ones. He swallowed. The little ones stay at the breaker. They keep the little ones. Because a 5-year-old can't work a mill loom yet, but he can sort coal just fine and he's cheap. And... His face twisted. Miss Harper, if your boy's still 5, still a sorter, then he was never getting on any wagon at all. Not the Sunday cars, not this afternoon's, not any. That whole clock I gave you on the mountain, the wagons. The Sunday cars, 3 days, I gave it to you true, but it was the wrong clock. It's the clock for the older children. Your Tommy. His voice broke completely. Your Tommy's not being shipped anywhere. He's still at the Hollisburg breaker. He's been at the Hollisburg breaker this whole time, sitting on a bench over a chute with his little hands in the coal. And he's been there every single day of that year you've spent believing you might already be too late. The dry wash went silent. Evelyn Harper sat back on her heels, and her hands came slowly away from Silas Vane's coat, and something happened to her face that Caleb would remember for the rest of his life. A collapse and a rebuilding both at once, grief and fury, and a wild, terrible hope all breaking over her in the same instant. "He's here," she whispered. "He's here. He's been here. He's a mile away, right now. This whole time I thought I was chasing a wagon across the territory, and he's been sitting on a bench a mile from where I'm kneeling." "Yes," Silas said, wretched. "And that man with the stick has been walking those benches every day for a year." Her voice climbed. "Hiram Cole, with his stick, over my baby, for a year." "Evelyn." Caleb's voice low, but she wasn't hearing him. She was on her feet, the pistol in her hand, turned toward the direction of the town, and every ounce of the year she'd spent frozen and flat and far away had come roaring back into her all at once, and it had turned into something that scared even Silas Vane. "Evelyn." Caleb caught her arm. "Evelyn, look at me. You cannot walk into that town right now. You walk in there hot like this and you die, and then he's got nobody. You hear me? You are the only mother that boy has got in this world, and you do not get to throw yourself away on being angry. Not now. Not when we're this close." She turned on him wild. "Then what do we do? We just wait." While Cole? "No, we don't wait." Caleb held both her arms now steady, forcing her eyes to his, pouring every ounce of his mountain calm into her. "We do the exact opposite of what a hot person does. We go slow. We go quiet. We go smart. Because you heard the man Cole enjoys it. Cole guards what's his. And if Cole so much as smells a mother coming, he'll use the boy to break her. So we don't let him smell us. We don't ride in shooting. We slip in like weather. Tonight, quiet." He glanced at the sky. "The wagon of older children rolling out today, that's good for us. That means the town's busy, distracted, moving people around, guards out on the road. That's cover. That's our way in. But only if we're patient enough to use it." Evelyn was shaking, but she was hearing him now. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight." Caleb looked at Silas. "And you. You're going to tell me every single thing about that breaker, every door, every guard, where the sorters sleep, where Cole sleeps, everything. And if one word of it turns out to be a lie, if you walk us into Hiram Cole's arms, then I promise you, Silas Vane, the last thing you'll see on this earth is my face, and I'll be smiling. Are we clear? I'm not going to lie to you." Silas said quietly. "I'm done lying. I've got nothing left to protect, and one thing left to fix." He looked at Evelyn, and his ruined face held something that might in a better man have been the beginning of penance. "I put your boy in that breaker. Let me be the one that tells you how to get him out." And so, as the long Saturday afternoon burned down toward dusk in a dry wash, a mile from a company town owned root and branch by the machine that had swallowed Evelyn Harper's whole family, three people bent their heads together over a plan. A mountain man who moved like weather, a mother who'd stopped being arithmetic, and the broken gear who'd stolen everything and now meant to help give it back. While a mile away on a wooden bench above a coal chute in the deafening dark of the Hollisburg breaker, a 5-year-old boy named Tommy Harper pulled slate from coal with fingers scarred far past their years, and could not know, that after a year in the dark, his mother had finally come. They went in with the dark, the way Caleb said, slipping into Hollisburg like weather quiet. Lo, the town too busy with its own ugly business to notice 3 shadows coming through the gaps between its buildings. Silas led them true. Every door was where he'd said, every guard where he'd promised. He'd drawn it all out in the dry wash with a stick in the dirt. The breaker, the tipple, the long, low bunkhouse where they kept the sorters, the smaller building where Hiram Cole slept alone, because no man in Hollisburg could stand to sleep near him. And now, moving through the dark toward that bunkhouse, Caleb found each landmark exactly where the broken gear had put it, and with every one his last suspicion of Silas Vane fell away. The bunkhouse doors barred from outside. Silas breathed, crouched against a wall. One guard. He sits by the door with a lantern and a jug, and by this hour he's half in the jug. You get past him, you're in with the children. 40 of them, maybe more. And your boy's somewhere in there. How do we find him? Evelyn whispered. In the dark, among 40. He doesn't even know I'm coming. You'll find him, Silas said. A mother finds her own. But you have to be fast and you have to be quiet because those children have been trained not to make noise, and a room full of frightened children who suddenly aren't afraid anymore is the loudest thing in the world. Caleb went for the guard. It was over in a breath. The mountain man came out of the dark and the guard never got a sound out. And then Caleb was easing the man's slack body down and lifting the bar off the door slow so it wouldn't scrape. Evelyn. He caught her arm before she could rush in. You go, not me. 40 children wake up to a strange man in the dark, they scream. They wake up to a woman, a mother, they might not. You go find your boy. I'll hold the door. But Evelyn, his eyes held hers in the dark. Quiet. However it feels when you find him, however much you want to fall apart, you hold it. For 30 more seconds you hold it, and you get him out this door, and then you can fall apart all you want on the far side of these mountains. You understand me. I understand. Go. She went in. The dark inside was thick and close and full of the small sounds of sleeping children. Soft breathing, a cough, a whimper from some dream. Evelyn stood just inside the door with her heart in her throat and her eyes straining, and she thought 40 of them. Oh God, 40, how do I? And then something older than thought took over, something that had been waiting a year for exactly this, and she began to move down the rows of sleeping shapes, bending, looking, her breath held. Small faces, scarred small hands, even in sleep, even in the dark, folded and cracked. Children who slept the flat, exhausted sleep of the worked to the bone. She moved past them one after another, and her chest was breaking, and she wanted to gather up every single one of them and carry them all out into the night. And she couldn't. She could only look for one face, and she didn't even know anymore. If she'd know it, a year was so long, he'd have changed. So she stopped. There against the far wall, a small shape curled on its side, one thumb near its mouth. And even in the dark, even after a year, even before she saw the face, Evelyn Harper knew. A mother finds her own. Silas was right. She knew the shape of him. The curl of him, the way he tucked one hand under his cheek. She'd know it in her sleep. She'd known it in 100 dreams. She crossed the last few feet on her knees. Tommy. She breathed so quiet it was barely sound at all. Tommy, baby, it's Mama. The small shape stirred. He opened his eyes. And for one endless terrible moment, he didn't know her a year in the dark, had done that had taught him not to hope, had put a flat, far-off look on a 5-year-old's face that Evelyn recognized because she'd worn it herself on a chair in a saloon, and her heart cracked clean in two at that empty look on her baby's face. Then something moved behind his eyes, recognition breaking slow through a year of dark. "Mama." It came out cracked, disbelieving a whisper he'd been taught to keep small. "Mama, is it?" His face crumpled. "I thought you—" I know, baby." She had him then gathered up against her hand cupping the back of his head, and she pressed her mouth to his hair to keep him quiet, and felt him shaking against her. Felt the scarred little hands fist into her collar, and she held her own breaking heart in with everything she had, because Caleb had said 30 seconds, and she'd hold it for 30 seconds, and then she'd fall apart on the far side of the mountains. "I'm here. I came. I told you I'd always come. Now you have to be my brave boy, quiet as a mouse. We're going to walk out of here together, and we are never, ever coming back." "There's other kids," Tommy whispered against her neck. "Mama, there's other kids." Jonah's hand is real bad. And little P. She's only 4. She cries at night. And Evelyn Harper, kneeling on the floor of that bunkhouse with her stolen son in her arms, at last felt the whole shape of her life change one final time. Because she'd come for one child. She'd crossed a territory, faced down the house, held a gun for one child. Her child. But her child, 5 years old and scarred to the bone, had just used his first free breath to worry about the others. She looked up. 40 small shapes in the dark. 40 children with somebody's name. Somebody's grief. Somebody 100 miles away who didn't even know they were still alive. "Caleb," she whispered toward the door. He was there in an instant low. "We got to move, Evelyn. We're not just taking Tommy." Caleb went still. "I know what you're going to say," she said fast, fierce quiet. "I know it's 40 children, and we planned for one. I know it's harder and slower and more dangerous. I know we might lose everything trying. But Caleb, my boy, just woke up after a year in this dark, and the first words out of his mouth were about the other children. He's 5. He's 5, and he's more of a person than the whole house put together." Her voice shook. "You said the ledger's a lie. You said a person can just refuse to add up the way they want. Well, I'm refusing. I'm not carrying my son out of this room past 40 other mothers' sons. I can't. I won't be able to live inside my own skin if I do. So we take all of them, or you'll have to carry me out over your shoulder, because I am not leaving one single child behind in Hiram Cole's dark." For a long moment, Caleb Morgan looked at her. And then something happened in his weathered face that she'd never seen, a kind of light, a kind of fierce, glad grief. The look of a man who'd spent 20 years believing the world was too big and too cruel to fight, and had just this second been shown different by a woman on her knees in a coal town. "My sister was 9, Caleb said softly, "and there was nobody to come, for any of 'em." He looked out over the 40 sleeping shapes. "All right, Evelyn Harper, all right. We take 'em all." He turned toward the door, and there was iron in it now, and something almost like joy. "Silas." The broken gear came in low. "Change of plan," Caleb said. "We're not taking one. We're taking all of 'em. Every child in this room walks out tonight. You know this town, you tell me how 40 children get clear before Hollisburg wakes up?" Silas Vane stared at the room full of sleeping children, and Evelyn watched the last of the house die. In him watched 11 years of never learn their names, crack apart in a single breath, and Silas Vane, who had put these children here, dropped to his knees among them with a sound like a man finally setting down a weight he'd carried too long. "The coal wagons," he said hoarsely. "There's empty coal wagons behind the tipple loaded out for the morning run. Big ones tarped. You put 40 small children under those tarps, and you drive them out the west road at first light with the regular coal traffic, and nobody looks twice, because coal wagons leave Hollisburg every single morning of the world." He looked up and his eyes were wet. "But you need a driver who belongs. Somebody the gate guards know. Somebody they'll wave through without a second glance." He drew a shaking breath. "Somebody like a houseman." "You," Evelyn said. "Me." Silas Vane looked at the children, and then at Tommy, still fisted in his mother's collar, watching him with those flat, far-off eyes that Silas Vane had helped put there. "I drive the wagon. I get them through the gate. I've waved through 1,000 wagons, they'll wave through mine." And then, his voice broke. "And then maybe it's not enough. Maybe nothing's ever enough to unmake what I did. But maybe it's a start. Maybe learning 40 names is a start." They woke the children in the dark, one at a time. Gentle, a mother's hands, and a mountain man's calm, and a broken man's whispered promises. And it was the quietest miracle any of them would ever be part of. 40 children taught for a year. That noise brought the stick staying silent, as ghosts, while they were lifted and carried and hidden believing, because a woman with kind eyes told them to, that this time the dark was ending instead of beginning. They had them nearly loaded when it all came apart. The bunkhouse door banged open, and lantern light flooded in, and a voice like a whip cracked across the room. "What in God's name? Hiram Cole!" He stood in the doorway with a lantern in one hand and his stick in the other, and his eyes took in the room in a single sweep. The empty benches where children should be sleeping. The woman with a child in her arms, the strangers, and Silas Vane, the house's own man, down on his knees, helping children out a window. And Hiram Cole's face went through surprise and into fury, and out the far side into something worse, something cold and pleased, because a man who enjoys hurting small things had just been handed the biggest chance to hurt he'd ever get. His eyes fixed on Evelyn, on the child in her arms, the Harper woman. He smiled, and it was Silas Vane's old smile, 100 times worse. "Well now, come all this way for your boy." The stick rose slow. "Let's see how brave you are when I—" He never finished it, because Caleb Morgan had spent 20 years alone on a mountain, learning to move like weather, and Hiram Cole never even saw him cross the room. There was no speech, no warning, no drawn-out fight. There was Hiram Cole raising a stick over a room full of children, and then there was Caleb Morgan's fist. And then there was Hiram Cole on the floor, the stick spinning away, the lantern rolling, and Caleb standing over him with a look on his face that emptied every ounce of cruelty right out of the man. "You walked these benches for a year," Caleb said low and terrible, one boot on the stick. "Over a 5-year-old boy. Over 40 of them." He didn't raise his voice. He never did. "I ought to give you back every stroke of that stick, every single one." His jaw worked. "But there's 40 children watching me right now. And I'll be damned if the last thing they learn in this room is a man beating another man on the floor. So I'm gonna do something worse to you than the stick, Hiram Cole." He hauled Cole up by the collar. "I'm gonna let 'em all watch you get tied up and hauled out of here helpless, so every one of these children carries the memory of the day the man with the stick got small. That's your punishment. You get to be nothing in front of them forever." They tied Hiram Cole with his own belt and left him gagged in the corner, and they finished loading the children, and as the first gray of Sunday morning came up over Hollisburg, Silas Vane climbed onto the seat of a tarped coal wagon with 40 silent children hidden in the bed behind him. "The gate guards know me," he said down to Caleb. "They'll wave me through. You and Evelyn and the boy, you go out on foot through the gap I showed you, and you meet me at the dry wash, and then we ride west, and we don't stop till these mountains are behind us." He looked down at Evelyn, at Tommy in her arms. "Miss Harper, I can't give you back the year, nobody can, but I can give you the morning." His ruined face worked. "Tell him someday when he's grown, if he ever asks, tell him one of the men who took him is the same one that drove him out. Tell him people can turn. Even late. Even too late to matter much. Tell him a man can spend 11 years being a gear and still choose one gray morning to be something else." "I'll tell him," Evelyn said. Silas Vane snapped the reins, and the wagon rolled toward the gate, and the guards saw a houseman they knew and waved him through without a second glance, and 40 stolen children rolled out of Hollisburg under the tarps and into the free morning, and not one of them made a sound. They met at the dry wash. They rode west. And they didn't stop all that long day until the coal country and the company town and the whole hungry machine of it had sunk below the horizon behind them. The children went to a mission 2 days west to a hard-kind woman who wept when she saw them and swore on her Bible to find every name and every home. Silas Vane rode on alone after that, east back the way they'd come to Chicago. He said to a man named Corliss, and a ledger full of names with everything he knew about the house, and a willingness to say it out loud to anyone with the law to use it. "It won't fix it," he'd said at the parting. "The machine's too big, but a gear that turns state's evidence, that's a thing the machine truly can't abide. Let me be one grain of sand it can't get out." And then he'd tipped his hat to Evelyn and looked one last long time at Tommy and ridden off toward whatever justice a broken man could still buy. And Caleb Morgan took Evelyn and Tommy Harper up his mountain. Summer was full and gold by the time they reached his cabin, and Caleb stood in his own doorway feeling like a stranger in it because he'd built this place for one man to be alone in. And now there was a woman drawing water from his creek and a boy chasing something small through the grass. And the silence he'd guarded for 20 years was full of sound, and it did not feel like a rope around his neck at all. It felt like the opposite. It felt like the thing the silence had been for all along, and he just hadn't known it. He was splitting wood one evening, the light going long and gold, when Evelyn came and stood beside him, and Tommy was asleep inside, and it was quiet in the good way. "I've got a speech," she said. Caleb set down the axe. "The one you saved. So you wouldn't waste it on my grave. That's the one." She looked at him, and there was no far-off place in her eyes anymore. Hadn't been for weeks. Just a young woman standing on a mountain in the summer light. "Caleb Morgan, you paid $20 for me in a saloon, and I asked you why, and you said you had a sister." She stepped closer. "And I want you to know that I've spent this whole ride figuring out my answer. And here it is." Her voice didn't shake. "You're going to think I'm staying because I owe you. Because you saved my boy. Because you saved me. Because a woman who owes a debt like that stays and pays it off. And I know how you are. I know you'd carry that. You'd let me stay. And you'd never once let yourself believe it was anything but the debt. Because you've spent 20 years believing you're a man that folks stay near out of obligation and never out of wanting." Caleb went very still. "So I'm going to say the thing you'll never let yourself believe," Evelyn said. "And then I'm going to keep saying it every day until you do. I'm not staying because I owe you, Caleb. I stopped keeping ledgers the day you let go of that horse. I'm staying." Her chin trembled, but her voice held iron under the trembling, the way it always had. "I'm staying because I spent a year being a thing that got bought and sold, and I forgot I was a person. And you're the one who reminded me not with a speech, but by kneeling in the dirt over my bleeding feet. And I finally found something in this whole cruel arithmetic world worth living for, instead of just surviving through. And it's this. It's you. It's that boy. It's this mountain, and this silence, and the sound of an axe in the evening." She took his rough hand in both of hers. "I'm not staying because I owe you. I'm staying because I finally found something worth staying for. And I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving to a stubborn mountain man that a person can be chosen and not just rescued." Caleb Morgan, who had not wept since he was 14 years old, and standing at a grave with the wrong name on the marker, felt his eyes burn and did not look away from her. "I couldn't save my sister," he said rough. "I know. I've carried that 20 years, told myself the smartest thing a man can do is need nobody. Build his walls high." His voice broke. "And then a saloon flea put you up on a chair and you didn't flinch, and it undid every wall I ever built in about 4 seconds flat." "I know that too," Evelyn said softly. "You told me by the fire, first night." "I'm telling you again." He turned his hand over and held hers. "Because I want you to hear the whole of it plain, the way you gave me the whole of it. I didn't save you, Evelyn. That's the thing you got backwards. I've been drowning up on this mountain for 20 years so slow I didn't even know it was water. And you and that boy came up here and pulled me out. So if we're keeping ledgers, the ghost of a smile, the first full one she'd ever seen on him. And I know you said you quit, but if we were, then I reckon I owe you. For the pulling out. For reminding a dead man he was still breathing. Then we're even, Evelyn said. And we can both stop counting. We can both stop counting, Caleb agreed. And from inside the cabin, a small voice called out, Tommy, waking from a nap, no fear in it anymore, no flat, far-off place, just a 5-year-old boy calling for his mother in the golden evening light. Mama! And Evelyn Harper turned toward it with her whole face open and unguarded, and Caleb Morgan watched her go, and understood, finally and fully, what 20 years of grief had bought him. It had bought him this mountain no longer empty, this woman who'd chosen him, this boy who'd wake now for the rest of his childhood to somebody calling back. In a world that had priced a human soul at $20, 3 broken people had looked the whole hungry machine of it dead in the eye and refused to be arithmetic, refused to add up, refused to let each other disappear, and had built out of that refusal the one thing the machine could never make and never buy and never break. A family. The sun went down gold behind the peaks, and the mountain was quiet, and for the first time in 20 years, the silence was not empty at all.